hungry Trilobyte podcast would like to start by acknowledging Soonercon. Join us for Oklahoma's premier pop culture convention. Soonercon returns June 20th through 22nd, 2025. This will be the 33rd year for Soonercon, and this year will bring even more cosplay, celebrity guests, kids' workshops, gaming, comic art, and after-hours events. Visit Soonercon.com for details.
On tap today, we have Ben Kvalo. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Now, you are joining us. You are the founder of Midwest Games, which is a publisher based out of Middle America, U.S., and that is a good thing for reasons I want to get into in a little bit.
Perfect.
But to summarize it, and you can fill in the details much better than I could, but you are a newer publisher for video games. A lot of your stuff is available on Steam. A few things are making it to Switch and Xbox. And I want to say the thing I love about it is that most of your games fall into the category of what I call the AA titles. And that is the thing we need most in the industry right now, in my humble opinion, because you have a couple of what I would call AAA games. But the games that are really solid, excellently put together, but don't necessarily get the big push of the AAAs, that used to be the meat and potatoes of the video game industry until not too long ago.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the industry I come from as well. So I remember a world where even back in my early days when we were first putting out like Borderlands and BioShock, really those games were more AA than what the AAA world that we live in now, or quadruple A. So yeah, a lot of our portfolio is anything from indie to AA, and really focused around, well, where are creators in other places? And so that's a piece of what we do. And then we also do another piece that is a brand new model in games that I can kind of go into a little bit later around shadow publishing. But we are a new publisher. We're located in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We're representing the Midwest. We are the first publisher in Wisconsin's history, and trying to kind of challenge, where this business can be done and how it can be done, because we believe that we need to be more sustainable in how we operate, and we need to look at new models as the industry has really changed over the last few years.
Yeah. And when I talked about how it's great to be based out of Middle America, people think of the video game industry as being a very West Coast and somewhat maybe New York City type of thing. And so many small publishers and developers get set up elsewhere in the country and have for a long time. And some great games have come as a result of that. I had some gents on from the Chicago game space a couple of months back, and they showed me how they, especially like the Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin area was the foundation for coin-op games through the whole country.
Yep. Yeah, people forget not only coin-op games, people forget the fact that Dungeons and Dragons came from Wisconsin, from Lake Geneva. So you have a huge amount of games in many different that came from the Midwest regions, specifically Chicago, north of Chicago into Wisconsin. The Madison area is a game development hub these days. I mean, Raven Software was Activision's first acquisition ever, and they work in Call of Duty, and they just celebrated their 35th anniversary, and they've been in Madison the entire time. A company like Bungie was originally a Chicago company, and then moved out. You look at Dungeons and Dragons, which is now owned by Wizards of the Coast, which is, owned by Hasbro, and it got moved to Seattle, but again, Midwest in this kind of area. And so you have a lot of legendary things. Jackbox games, so many people play party games. Jackbox is such a legend. That is in Chicago as well. And so there's a huge variety of the types of games, including coin-op, pinball, like all of that coming from right here in the Midwest.
Yeah, so you're not some guy saying, I want to be in the industry, but I don't want to move. You're the guy saying that there's so much value here, there's so much talent here, and I can reach out to people and put some great things together with very low overhead, relatively speaking. And, again, your results speak for themselves.
Well, and there's pipelines. You look at the university systems in the Midwest. Some of the best public universities in the entire world are in the Midwest. And you look at the games programs at some of these places. You look at DePaul University. You look at UW Stout, UW Whitewater. You look at Michigan, Michigan State, Michigan Tech, all top tier game programs. And they are putting out tremendous talent. Now, what has happened is if there isn't some of the companies to house the talent, that talent has to go somewhere else. And most of it goes to the West Coast because the industry in the US, 62% of the industry is in California, Washington, and Texas. And so much of it had to historically go. But then you look at, and this is part of my bet, when I left Netflix in 2023, I saw the migration patterns that happened from 2020 to 2022. And guess what? Even though they weren't like loudly saying it, people moved back to the Midwest. They moved back to, or for the first time, to a place that is more sustainable, better quality of life, lower cost of homes, everything that folks were looking for that didn't want to continue to live in really expensive places, despite them being hubs, because suddenly, as COVID proved out, our industry can be done remotely. And so many people came back to Wisconsin, came back to the Midwest, and are there. And the funny thing is, in hosting socials and different events in Wisconsin, I've found that, I hosted the first Green Bay social for video games, and it led to over 200 people showing up at this event, first time having this kind of thing. And what I was surprised about was it wasn't hobbyists. It wasn't just fans of games. It was people that work for giant companies that ultimately were doing it in Wisconsin remotely, kind of under the radar. They didn't want the companies to necessarily know they were in Wisconsin, but they were there, and that's where they wanted to be. And I think looking at some of the other data, around 70% of people would rather lose their job or get demoted or get a pay decrease than to go back to some of these hubs. It just creates an ingredient of, well, if we get more opportunities here, the talent is here or wants to be here, and all we have to do is create the pathway for them to stay or come.
Fantastic. And so you're basically rolling out the welcome mat. And is that kind of a part of what this shadow publishing that you're referring to is?
So the shadow publishing is, as we looked at the modeling within games and where we're at. So, we can do a quick history of it, which, we all kind of know, but we don't always think about in this lens, is, the eras of games. And, there was a coin op era, there was the console era, and there was a more digital with console era, and we're moving into a very, very digital era. And so the business has changed, and ultimately publishing used to be an era of a lot of these companies that are traditional publishers came from the era of direct store relationships. They would go to Walmart and GameStop and all these places and be able to get end caps. If you even know what an end cap is for a lot of listeners, or get placement in these, and the publishers own those pipelines. Like, there was a really hard time if as an indie dev to get in from like a self-publish, and you would have to have an enormous amount of relationships to get in independently without a publisher. Well, times have completely changed. If we think about the eras, we're in a digital first era where ultimately no one owns the pipelines. If you have $100, you can put a game on Steam, and so the publishing model has changed, but the publishing system has not really. Ultimately, it's still dependent upon developer needing money, and then the publisher takes a majority of the rev share, IP rights, or long-term strings attached to have the ability to continue to move forward this thing. Meanwhile, the risk proposition has all changed. More games are going to market than ever before. We had 19,000 on Steam last year. We're going to probably have 25,000 this year. So the volume has gone up dramatically. The hit rates for publishers have gone down. So they're trying to get even more now. And then suddenly VC came into it in about 2016, 2017, 2018, and they started actually giving developers money directly, so they didn't have to go through a publisher. So the whole system has kind of like changed, and what shadow publishing is acknowledging the system has changed and saying, okay, well, instead of taking rev share, IP rights, or stringing up somebody long term, what if we create a flexible model where a developer who has money can pay us up front as a monthly retainer, and they unlock all the services of a publisher without the long-term strings attached, and they can hire us in a very flexible model, and we can support anyone in the entire world, and allow them to have publishing services, which are still so key because publishers make effectively over 90% of the revenue, despite being under 2% of the total volume of titles. And so creating this kind of flexible model to unlock some of these services is kind of the goal of shadow publishing.
So let me kind of, because I don't completely understand everything you just said there, I'll be very honest with you. But what I heard was, if I'm a developer with a solid product, I have a game that I want to release, and I can come up to you, I can take your services on for a year or two if I think that's in my best interest, and we work together, the game gets out, people buy it, and then I have the choice. I can stick with you, I can go off on my own again, or if some like giant publisher, we'll call them LexCorp, comes along and decides they want to take the game instead, I can give it to LexCorp.
Yep.
So that, basically it gets your feet off the ground and you take on the businessy end of things.
We help. What publishing has always been and should always be, but hasn't acted like it the last 30 years, is a support function for game developers to get their games to market in the best way, and supplementing areas of weaknesses by providing, areas of expertise that are not desirable to have from a standpoint of overhead. So like release management, like you're only releasing the game in a certain window, and obviously updates you need to consistently release off of that. But leading up to the launch of a game, you don't need to have to hire full-time release management resources when you only need it for this window. So, what happens right now in the current publishing system is you're paying for all of those resources at a premium via your revenue share and IP rights, even though you don't need them all the time, but you're paying for them. And this system's saying, no, pay for them when you need them. And so it allows it much more flexibility, and it matches better where every single game developer I've ever talked to has a different strength weakness profile. And so it's better where we can go, hey, these are your strengths. We don't need to serve those areas. You're really good at those areas. Here are your gaps. Here are the areas we've identified that we can come in, help you do all these things. And then, it's at this cost because it's these specific services. And so it just is a better fit for game developers to fit what their strengths and weaknesses truly are.
That's really refreshing to hear when we've had so many years of just discussion on how creators just get shafted by the industry and these one-size-fits-all contracts that they either sign or they go broke, is what it boils down to. And that's been the case for a very, very long time. And it's, as we move into this digital age, we haven't seen a lot of signs that was going to change.
Yeah, and it's not going to change until someone changes it, right? Like why, and this is why publishing hasn't changed. If you're making over 90% of the revenue anyways, why would you change? Like, yeah, they are adapting slightly. You're seeing it with layoffs or shifts in business strategy, focusing in certain areas. Even like somebody like EA who gets a lot of crap for layoffs, they've actually increased the amount of workers they have, but they focus them in different areas than they used to be in. And ultimately, they haven't fully changed their business model overall. But it takes somebody coming in and being like, let's do something the exact opposite. Let's completely disrupt this existing model. And by doing so, it forces these older folks or older companies to either change and adapt or die. And then we see it through the history of every industry ever is you go through these cycles. It's just games is right now in that cycle, and people don't always realize in the moment when you're in a cycle like that, but we're in a disruption cycle. I mean, the last company I worked at was Netflix. Netflix obviously disrupted the entertainment and linear industry in such a huge way, but for a long time, people refused to adapt. Blockbuster refused to adapt. And even turned down buying Netflix because they thought, they knew what was best, and they died. Whereas others have adapted, and now some of those are trying to do streaming and trying to keep up with what Netflix is doing. And so I think we're in a disruptive moment. Now, is our solution going to be the one that truly changes the whole industry? I don't know. We'll see, but we need a lot of people experimenting and trying new things, because my belief is that there is a model that is going to disrupt. And maybe it is our model, maybe it is something else that somebody else is thinking about. But the existing model, there's no way it can survive long term, because the conditions in market no longer work with that old model.
One of the things that I could definitely see being a disruption, that we haven't really completed the transition, but we can definitely see the acceleration of it, is the fact that we're now seeing hardware not really matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, if you were playing a set of games, that set of games was defined by whatever company built the box you're playing them on. And I'm even just looking at your services here. There's a lot of variety there, and if you have a couple different devices, you have access to the bulk of games, and that's only accelerating more. That you can have, let's say, just a Switch, and 90% of the games on the market are yours to play within trade-offs. How do you think that's going to affect things?
Well, I think we're getting to a democratized place where you can play any game on any device, anywhere in the world, at any point. Now, it's all going to be via different kinds of services. So it's, in some ways, we look at, well, how is a company like Netflix set up? Like, where they're able to put streaming on any device, anywhere in the world, at any point, with anybody. And I think games is getting to that point. Now, technology still has a long way to come from the cloud perspective in order to manage especially larger games, but smaller games, smaller experiences are very viable in those areas. So I think in some ways, we're going to see different kinds of smaller content kind of emerge that might hit larger audiences in giant ways. And we're still going to have the big experiences on PC. They're complementary. It's not like you have to choose one or the other. You can do both. It just depends on the scenario you're in. If you're out and about with a bunch of friends and you're able to easily, like, you have a TV in front of you and you can easily jump in, play a party game of some sort with a bunch of friends. Yeah, it doesn't matter that it's like really sophisticated or high-end graphics or any of that stuff. Are you having fun with your friends in the moment when you want to have fun? Like, the more accessibility to games content that happens increases the amount of gamers there are in the world. And really why we see games continue to grow is games are just continuing to become more accessible to more people around the globe. And everyone's a gamer. When it comes down to it, everybody is a gamer one way or another. Your games that you play are going to be different more often than not, but everyone is a gamer. And the more we can be accessible, which this new era of direct digital, direct to consumer type of approaches makes it more accessible. It's just like, what are the experiences that people most resonate with? How do we bring people together around those? Anything social tends to really do well. And I think if you're able to play something directly on a TV without having to have an Xbox or a PlayStation or Switch or any of that stuff, like, that is even more accessible to more folks.
Now, I was actually kind of almost afraid to go that last step that you were talking about there, where we just, every game is on every platform. I didn't want to actually say that could be the final goal, but it is the logical end result.
Well, it's all going to be services, though. Like, so it's going to depend how the service structure is, because, there are still going to probably be exclusive for certain services. There's going to be different licensing agreements, like all of that's still going to be kind of figured out. And that's how you bring people into a certain service. And how it will look for games is probably going to look very different than how it looks for like linear entertainment. But we can at least take some learnings from it and see, okay, well, Netflix has this, Disney Plus has this. and we know that, and we pay for a service, and we get those things. And so it's not truly accessible. Like truly accessible would be agnostic of any services. I don't think we're going to get there because people want control. They want to be able to bring them on. They don't want to just allow anyone to play with anybody. That's why it's always been a struggle, like cross-platform play. Now, some of them have gotten on board with that, but it's still not across the board for every game ever. And I don't think it will be with these services either. Everyone's going to want to own their own audience in some way, but it is going to be where there are different services that provide different things. And maybe it's more like custom, like Crunchyroll does anime. Is it like cozy games are going to be on a certain service, or strategy games are going to be on a certain service? It could be, who knows? So it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves. It won't look like whatever the systems we're seeing today, but I do think that is an end result of many of these things. And then what's the state past that is going to be really interesting as well.
And just like, for example, if you're saying with crossplay, if somebody starts making a new game and that company says, I want to, from the beginning, I want to have this thing playable on both Xbox and PlayStation and Switch, and the players need to be able to talk to each other, and they can build that from the ground up with that in mind. Just like if a smaller developer is saying, hey, I want to have my game in the hands of people with Switches and PCs and Steam boxes and iPhones, that can be something they build in. That the longer that this goes on, the trend is going to be to want to grab more of the audience. And you almost never want to grab less if you have a choice between the two.
Yeah, unless you are just going after a really core audience, and that core audience spends a lot of money, and it doesn't overlap with other audience in a big way. Like, but that's pretty rare. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you want to continue to expand it. But what's going to be interesting about like this service side approach, what's really complicated, people often forget about, is how complicated and challenging it is to have multi-platform setup, navigation, keeping everything, on the same SKUs, like, because each of these platforms has a different certification process, requirements, all that stuff. And it becomes so burdensome to be able to maintain that and all the maintenance that's involved in it. Whereas like in this kind of single service structure where there's no Xbox versus PlayStation, like it's just focused on whatever devices these things are going on, which does that make it more complicated? Does that make it less complicated? Is it on the service to make sure that whatever the service is like, works on anything? You look at a Netflix, and they're incredible at like, if you have barely any service in India, you can still get Netflix because they've got it to the point that it still serves it. Now it's slower, or my parents' internet in the middle of a farm field, essentially in the middle of Wisconsin, like their internet's terrible, yet Netflix still works. No other streaming services work well. Netflix is optimized to the point that it works on really low-end internet or low-end devices. So will that be on these services to do it, rather than right now it's on the developers to adapt to each of these platforms so that their game can play on the platform? So does it change kind of the relationship on who is doing some of these things, and does that help the developer or actually make it more challenging? Like that's going to be really interesting to see and watch.
For sure. And again, given the types of games you're playing here, and I really do want to get back to some of your partners here, because you've had a great selection of games on here that just looking over, the one that really struck me, honestly, first of all, Duck Paradox, I just think is a hilarious concept here. Mm-hmm. It is very much like it. I almost saw a Contra vibe in there, but adorable.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fun one. That game started as a game jam student project that, we helped to grow into a full-fledged game experience. It's incredibly hard, but incredibly rewarding. The loop in it is really well done by the developer Diego. And it's funny how, like, a student, he just finished, graduated, going to build off and really grow a studio more. It can create something so incredible And it has this charm to it. And obviously ducks help with the charm, but he came up with a really just a clever approach to make this a repeatable game that really stood out among others. And so that one has been such a pleasure to be able to work on and help somebody as a first time, professional developer go out and get to market and help them succeed in market.
And to use another example here, there was one called the Lullaby of Life, which it has a quality I've only really started seeing recently as a mainstream thing, but it's almost a mindset type of game where the aesthetics and the patterns of the game and the gameplay almost put you in a meditative state. It's very good at calming, even when it gets to a very frantic pace. The calming nature of it is therapeutic almost. And the only time I would say that I saw that before recently was like Tetris.
Yep. Well, and I think a lot of more games are looking at that. I think of it like, we often think about, okay, what is a genre, or some of the metadata around the game loops or style of game or art style, but also we need to think about mood state. Like, when somebody has just a stressful day, what is a game they can play that helps them get out of that, helps them escape? Games do such a great job of that in so many different ways, but there is a therapeutic aspect of things that it's a game. It's designed as a game. It's like Lullaby of Life as a puzzle game, but it's the music. It's the piece that comes with it. And there's many ways you can approach entertainment and the feelings you're giving somebody. And so you have to think about the mood state. You have to think about when someone would play certain types of games. Because that's where the gaps are, is, when 60% of games are game time played is games that are 5 years or older, and you really have a really hard time competing with those. Well, when are the gaps that they're not playing those games, and there's an opportunity to get them in to play a different game, or like, what does that game do? Like, what's a game that does something very different and provides a different need for somebody that the game that they're playing doesn't provide? So I think you have to really think about, like, where are the opportunities in such a saturated market that you have to approach it in a very different way. And that was, attempted this, an incredible developer in Mexico called One Simple Game, that, they are incredible with these types of games. And a lot of times, developers in Mexico are overlooked. Like, they have an incredible development scene in Mexico, and people don't think about that. There's so much talent down there, and we need to be able to better support some of that talent so that games like this can actually flourish.
And a firm like yours that specializes in looking at each developer as an individual on a strengths and weaknesses basis, the differences between different countries and geographies isn't a hurdle for you. It's something that you're going to be able to approach them and say, okay, we can help you bring your game to this audience, that audience.
Yeah. I mean, it's all, how willing are you to flex outside of your comfort zones to help a partner? And a lot of traditional publishers just are not flexible in any way. You have to go into their box, their system, and do things their way. Now, what I think, some newer publishers are finding success with is adapting to what the developer needs or where they are. And ultimately, there's challenges that come with it, but if you're willing to flex to it, there's a lot of benefit that comes with it as well. There's certain countries that are not as English proficient. So if you sign a game from that country, there's going to be more challenges, especially if you're trying to bring it to an English market, because there might not be some of those automatic knowledge or awareness around certain things and certain ways of doing things that might be very common in the US or another English-speaking nation or region. And you have to be willing to spend the time to teach some of the nuances of that, why things are done in certain ways. And I think it's a good lesson, because also it helps teach you some of the nuances of their region, and how you can even make your other games outside of the one you're working with them on more relevant for their region. And so I think it's just being willing to put, the time in on it can have a large payoff, but it does take time. And if you're not setting up your system in the right way, or the model in the right way, if you're just trying to churn out content, like, you're not willing to spend that time investment that can create a lot of benefits on the back end, but it might not be like obvious benefits from a P&L perspective.
Very true. I go back to, I got into gaming with the NES and immediately started collecting the weird stuff once the NES fell out of fashion. And in that time, there were so many games that would come to light afterward that Americans would say this was released in Japan and it would never have worked in the United States. And I just always felt like there had to be so much more to that if other countries got to develop these, there would be so many little cultural things or mindset things that would slip into games from other regions that would not translate, or maybe would translate, but in different ways if we brought them to the US or try to take them elsewhere. And you're kind of saying that that's now actually coming out of the woodwork, that we're seeing these cultural shifts when people, from say Peru decide to start getting into gaming and start developing their own games.
Yeah. And I think exposure to new experiences, new perspectives will always end up creating a shift over the long span. And too often we as an industry are only thinking about the short term, like Korean, PC cafes are actually becoming much more common in North America, finally. But they've been, obviously, were such a popular thing in Korea, and ironically are, I guess, or I've heard, are less popular than they used to. But I don't think it's a matter of oh, well, this region only likes these types of games. I think it's a matter of exposure. And the more you can drive exposure points, the more open every region is to every other region's type of gameplay or approach, because there's always an audience within the region that would be very open to it, but they've just never gotten exposure to those things. And now that we're in such a digital global world, we have the opportunity to really try new things and experience new ways of playing that we've never considered before, but might be commonplace in another region. And so that's a really cool effect of all of this. But you have to be willing to challenge the norm and be cool, these actually do work in another region, or could, but we have to give it a chance in order for it to have a chance to work.
So I'm going to think about my audience for a minute here. And a lot of them are creatives that are just getting started. And I see them at conventions a lot where they're trying to put together a small time developer studio, or maybe there's a pixel artist who would just love a developer to work with. What would be your advice to them to try to, pool their resources and come up with a product that might be compelling to sell on a service such as yours someday?
Yeah, for us, we release games on any platform ever. So I think for young developers, young creatives, it is getting a good sense of what are the markets out there, what are the opportunities out there. You should always, as much as it's sometimes you want to make something for yourself or something that you really wanted to create, but you have to think about the audience. Making something that you're the only audience member that wants is not going to lead to being able to create partnerships with larger entities that will help promote and grow that thing that you're creating. You have to think about, okay, well, what is the market that's out there? And sometimes it's hard to know because it might be a new market or an emerging market, and there might not be as much data around it. I always try to look at all the data, but then, look at the creative and what they're trying to do and who might like something like that at some point, even if it isn't right now. But I think it all comes down to, as you're creating something, you need to think about the market you're thinking about, and that naturally creates potential relationships, because as you're creating that, it might align to a certain publisher or a certain partner. And for us, especially because of shadow publishing, we are there to support whatever it is under the sun, whatever platform you want to go to. But we also we also have certain expertise in some areas that we don't have in others, that some other group might have better expertise around. And we're ones that we're happy to introduce. Like if somebody presents me an amazing strategy game, the first thing I'll say is like, hey, have you talked to Hooded Horse? Because they are incredible as a publisher in putting out strategy and tactic games. And I'm like, they should be your number one priority. And as much as like that's me like potentially like releasing business, like I think it's better that you align to somebody that really knows whatever that area is, and can provide the most support. And then we are here as like supplemental support, flexible support, support to help you get connections into those pieces. And so that's the ways you could work with us, but always think about, again, who your market is, and then who do you want as a partner, and do they match really with what you're going for?
Very solid. I mean, that makes sense. And as much as I encourage people to kind of go in the direction they want and follow their hearts and then just do their passion, like at some point you're going to have that conversation about what's going to pay the bills, and then do you want to work on your own forever, or do you want to attract people to work with you?
Yeah, well, and the reality of it is, if you want to have control and ownership, you have to learn to run a business of it. If you don't care about control and ownership, you'll end up working for somebody else, and then they determine kind of it. And it might vibe well. It might be perfectly aligned to what you want to do creatively. And that's great, but you don't have control over it. And so it's a balancing act. There, sometimes people land in the perfect situation with it and it works out. But a lot of times there's a give and take on it. And some of it is, like, I always encourage people, they should have a base level of business knowledge because you are an entrepreneur. If you're a game developer, you're an entrepreneur. You're creating a business, and you need a base level of business knowledge so that you're not getting taken advantage of, so that you know the opportunities, so that you know how to set up some basic things. And there's a lot of ways to get that knowledge. You don't have to go to college for it. You can absolutely get it in many different ways, or get mentors that will help you along the way as well. But it's really key to have that, so that you know what your options are, and that you're able to, if you want control, and especially creative control, that you're able to maintain that longer term.
So where are people most likely going to find games from Midwest Games in the next 2 years? When they look for them, where are they likely to see them?
So the games on a traditional publishing end, we'll be on Steam, we'll be on Xbox, Switch, PlayStation, for as long as those platforms are viable, wherever there's viable platform. But we might also be on Discord. We might also be on TV, direct TV, LG, Samsung. Some of these kinds of platforms that you can actually play games directly on now. So we're going to be in a lot of different places, and be open to emerging spaces in games, because there's a lot of new ways, and wherever there's a community, there's an opportunity for a games platform. That's why I'm excited about Discord. But we're going to be all over the place. And right now, PC is still dominated by Steam. I think there'll be competition long term, but right now there's not. It's just Steam. And so yeah, we're on all of the viable platforms, and then looking at emerging platforms as well.
Okay. And if somebody wants a list of what you have available, there is your website, midwestgames.com.
Yeah, midwestgames.com. Otherwise, you can look at Midwest Games on Steam and find our publisher page. You can follow our publisher page, which is always useful, so you get updates on all the games coming out. We have a couple games coming up that are really, really exciting. A game called Tomb Water, which is a Souls-like Western. We have a demo out on that. And so if you like Bloodborne plus like a classic Zelda, but in a Western setting, like it's just such an incredible game. Single person developer in Columbus, Ohio, Moth Atlas, like just absolutely amazing. And then The Legend of Babu, which we don't have a demo out yet for, but working on that, a studio in Turkey, more 3D Zelda-like puzzle solver. If you've ever played Kenna, kind of like that, except you have a big fluffy dog that you get to play with. And then we have another game called Floor is What, which is a party game from a studio in Wisconsin that we're also working on as well.
Okay. I'm going to put everything you just said in my show notes on my website, aaronbossig.com. Ben, I want to thank you so much for being there. I would love to follow up and check out what you're doing. And I would love to have you back on the show anytime.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for having me. Fun discussion, and always happy to chat more.
Likewise. Let's keep in touch.